Yeah, that is an interesting point. Interesting too. The I don't know. I do think a lot of this is just part of an anti-intellectualism, anti-science movement that seems to have roots in both the right and the left.
Joe, we were just talking about that, and I wish you would talk a little bit, because I think it's really on point about your findings when people choose to employ magical thinking in spite of evidence to the contrary. And you just did this on 2020, and it was great to read it.
Right. I don't know if I can remember the specifics of that, but the general idea is, and there's oodles of information about this. I think one phenomenon is called confirmation bias, where people will take almost all information as they insulate their theory in a certain way, almost all information as evidence in support of their theory. And another phenomenon is just if you try to attack people's viewpoints, they only seem to hold them more firmly than if you had just left them alone. But and it's well, I could talk about this general subject forever. I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about that.
But it's important because it's the foundation for this kind of behavior.
There are other broader issues that I'm interested in philosophy, in where do we get our core beliefs from? And there's good reason to think that they don't have a rational basis, and there are all sorts of different. Some people think they're attributable purely to cultural influences and something, and that may well be. But it does seem as if when we come into the project of gaining knowledge and gaining information, we already have a lot of firm bedrock beliefs, and because they didn't get there through argument. Argument's unlikely to get them out of there either.
That's right.
Right. So, whereas, if you might develop a false belief, you might think that a friend of yours is having an affair or something, and then if you find evidence to the contrary, you find out, oh no, his twin brother was in town, and so there was a case of mistaken identity, then the initial belief will go away. But there's something interesting about these cases where evidence doesn't make the belief go away. And I do think that ultimately the reason is because evidence didn't get the belief there in the first place, right? So a lot of what's fueling these people, I think, are kind of holistic views, not necessarily religious views, although they could be religious views.
That's a segment. That's not
but something,
the entirety.
Yeah, but something broad foundational views about life and how to enjoy life and what's important in life and other things like this. I was touched by some of the descriptions that you had of these people who are interested in becoming midwives, the positive elements of those descriptions, that they go in to provide a certain kind of service, and they certainly think that they're doing something, or even just to experience the birthing experience. I mean, there's something wonderful and lovely about that. So it's not as if the motivations are tainted in any sort of way, but there does seem to be, at some point, some decisions perhaps are unhinged from evidence and experience and information that we have against these practices. Maybe
for some people, I think particularly the people who have religious affiliations, that this is culturally acceptable for them. Often they don't know what they don't know. And so this is an adventure in learning, and they have someone that they trust to mentor them. And if you don't know what somebody doesn't know, if you haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to a larger picture or to multiple teachers, as you would in a college setting, for example, of course you tend to take what you're being told. The person who's teaching you or mentoring you is gracious and kind. Why would you suspect that she was telling you things that weren't true? You wouldn't suspect that. You would want to be involved in it, and you would admire her. These people And I think the answer to this, and this is kind of off the wall, and we haven't talked about this, Joe, but I have a sense that if people want to make midwifery safe in Idaho, they need to approach the legislators and ask if there can be some special funding developed for students who want to pursue this to receive a state scholarship, say, in exchange for working within the systems in Idaho to bring good health care to rural settings and even urban settings or demographic populations that may be underserved right now. If the state would be willing to help finance the education of people, that would be a wonderful outcome and a solution to this kind of fly-by-night, hope for the best operation. And there's no reason why the state wouldn't. I know the state is pretty stingy, but when children are born with having endured oxygen deprivation, we're talking about millions of dollars of state aid through Medicaid, special education, equipment to keep the child alive, round-the-clock nursing. That's expensive. It's much less expensive to hand out 5 or 10 scholarships a year to help with living expenses and pay educational expenses and make sure that anybody who's qualified and who wants to do this is trained to do it in a safe and responsible way.
That sounds like a good idea, actually. And isn't there an overabundance of nurses? I mean, wouldn't it give them a chance to maybe have a fallback career too?
I think that if they're already registered nurses, I don't know what the demographics and how many nurses we have, but if they wanted to specialize but couldn't. But I'm also thinking about young women who could use a 4-year scholarship to LCSC and then go on to UW or University of Oregon or some kind of medical school setting that teaches midwifery as well. It's an investment in the future of Idaho. So we can have the problem, and I can complain and wring my hands, and other people can get angry at me for calling them out. But the solution is to provide nurse midwives who are trained and able to handle this and meet everybody's needs.
It's not just a criticism of midwifery in
not
general.
At all.
It's just a criticism of this particular untrained aspect.
Yes, yes, and that's a nice way of putting it. This is a concern that should bother everybody. And if you're not having children, or you've chosen not to have kids, or you're like me and you're a grandmother many times over, it still matters, because I've got my granddaughters to think about. Although frankly, none of them would go that direction. But other people might. You know, they don't have crackpot grandmas who get on a tear. And when somebody says they're a certified professional midwife, I think that sounds pretty special. It doesn't sound like they finished high school and read a couple of books and watched people catch babies.
Right.
So it's a misleading title, but it's easy to see. And they are certified through their own organization, which is also, of course, run by and paid for and managed by other people with exactly the same credentials that they have, which in the real world are absolutely none.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm going to put on some more music right now, and then we might come back and have some final thoughts in a minute. If
you like. Otherwise, if anybody has any question, you can always get hold of me on 2020, and please check Not on the Palouse, because everything I've talked about will be up there with links, and you can learn yourself about this situation.
And I'll let you know next week about that, too, on KRFP Moscow.